The stadium trembled with the deafening roar of thousands, neon lights slicing through the darkness like blades. "Why does it always have to be them?" a voice hissed from the shadows backstage, venom dripping from every syllable. On stage, Jimin and Jungkook moved in perfect sync, their voices weaving together like fire and silk, their chemistry undeniable. To the audience, it was magic. To someone watching from the wings, it was a threat. Episode 1 began not with celebration, but with tension. Sweat glistened on Jungkook's temple as he spun, catching Jimin's gaze for a fleeting second, a silent exchange of trust and rhythm. The crowd erupted, a tidal wave of adoration that seemed to lift them higher. Yet behind the curtain, a pair of clenched fists trembled, nails digging into palms until blood surfaced. The harmony that electrified the arena was the same harmony that ignited resentment in the heart of someone who believed they were being erased. The story unfolded in fragments of sound and sensation. The pounding bass that rattled bones, the blinding strobes that painted the stage in fleeting bursts of white, the intoxicating mix of perfume, sweat, and smoke that clung to the air. Jimin's smile, radiant and effortless, masked the exhaustion gnawing at him inside. Jungkook's voice, steady and powerful, carried the weight of unspoken fears of being too perfect, too admired, too envied. As the concert surged toward its climax, the tension backstage thickened. A shadow lingered near the equipment, eyes burning with quiet rage. Every cheer for Jimin and Jungkook was a dagger, every synchronized step a reminder of exclusion. The resentment was not loud, not obvious. It was silent, festering, waiting for the right moment to strike. The night ended with fireworks exploding above the stadium, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Jimin and Jungkook bowed together, their hands brushing in a gesture of unity that sent the crowd into hysterics. But beneath the applause, beneath the glittering spectacle, a seed of hatred had been planted. It was invisible to the fans, unnoticed by the performers, yet it pulsed with life, promising that the harmony they shared would not remain untouched. This was not just a concert. It was the beginning of a war fought in silence, a conflict that would unravel through whispers, betrayals, and the dangerous weight of envy. And as the echoes of the crowd faded into the night, the stage was left haunted, not by failure, but by the promise of a storm yet to come. The roar of the crowd had not yet faded when the silence backstage became unbearable. Jungkook leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling with the remnants of adrenaline, while Jimin sat on a metal chair, his fingers trembling as he untied his boots. The air smelled of sweat, smoke, and faint perfume from the fans who had thrown gifts onto the stage. Their harmony had been flawless, but perfection came at a cost neither of them could yet name. "Did you see their faces?" Jimin whispered, his voice hoarse. "They weren't just cheering, some of them were watching." His eyes darted toward the shadowed corners of the room, as if expecting someone to emerge. Jungkook frowned, brushing damp hair from his forehead. "You're imagining things," he said, but his tone betrayed unease. He had felt it too, the weight of eyes that didn't belong to adoring fans but to someone who lingered with intent. The resentment had begun quietly, like a whisper in the dark. A fellow performer, once close, now felt eclipsed by their unity. Every synchronized step, every shared laugh, every effortless blend of voices was a reminder of exclusion. The jealousy was not loud, but it was sharp, cutting deeper with each performance. As the night stretched on, the tension seeped into their bones. Jimin found himself replaying moments on stage, the way Jungkook's hand had brushed his shoulder, the way the crowd had screamed louder for them together than for anyone else. It should have been a triumph, yet it felt like a curse. He remembered the clenched fists he had glimpsed backstage, the flicker of rage in someone's eyes. The following day, rehearsals carried a strange heaviness. The studio lights glared down, exposing every flaw, every hesitation. Jungkook pushed himself harder, his voice cracking under the strain, while Jimin forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Their bond was strong, but cracks had begun to form, cracks not between them but around them in the fragile circle of trust that surrounded their group. Whispers spread like smoke. "They think they're untouchable, always stealing the spotlight. Do they even care about the rest of us?" The words were never spoken directly, but they lingered in the air, poisoning the atmosphere. Jimin felt the sting of betrayal in every sidelong glance, every forced laugh. Jungkook, though silent, carried the weight of guilt, as if their unity had become a weapon against those they once called brothers. The resentment grew, invisible yet undeniable. It was in the way equipment mysteriously malfunctioned during their sets, in the way schedules shifted without explanation, in the way certain voices fell silent when they entered the room. The harmony that had once been their strength was now the spark of a fire they could not control. And as the next concert approached, the storm brewed closer. The stage would once again be their battlefield, the lights their shield, the crowd their witness. But behind the curtain, hatred waited patiently, sharpening itself in silence, ready to strike when the music reached its peak. This was no longer just about performance. It was about survival, of trust, of loyalty, of the fragile bond that held them together against the tide of envy rising in the shadows. The rehearsal room was suffocating with tension. The mirrors reflected not just their movements but the unease etched into their faces. Jimin adjusted his microphone, his hands trembling slightly, while Jungkook forced his voice through another verse, each note carrying the weight of invisible pressure. The harmony was still there, but it felt fragile, as if one wrong breath could shatter it. "Do you feel it too?" Jimin asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the hum of the speakers. Jungkook paused, sweat dripping down his jawline, and nodded. "It's like someone waiting for us to fall." His words hung heavy in the air, unspoken fears finally given shape. The resentment had begun to manifest in subtle sabotage. A cable mysteriously frayed, causing feedback during soundcheck. Costumes arrived late, forcing them to scramble before performances. Small inconveniences that, when stacked together, felt deliberate. Jimin's instincts screamed that this was no coincidence. Jungkook, though calmer, carried the same suspicion deep in his chest. Their bond grew stronger in defiance of the hostility. Late at night, they sat together in silence, sharing unspoken comfort. Jimin confessed his fear of being hated for something he never intended, while Jungkook admitted the guilt of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol that others resented. They were not just performers, they were human, fragile beneath the spotlight. But the storm outside their bond grew louder. Whispers turned into cold stares, and cold stares into deliberate distance. The group that once felt like family now seemed fractured, each member retreating into their own shadows. Jimin noticed the way conversations stopped when he entered the room, the way laughter died when Jungkook joined. The silence was more painful than words. The next concert loomed like a trial. The stage lights would once again blind them, the crowd would once again scream their names, but behind the curtain the silent hatred waited. Jimin felt it in the pit of his stomach, a gnawing dread that something would happen, something that would tear apart the fragile unity they had fought to protect. As the night of the performance arrived, the air was electric with anticipation. Fans lined the streets, their chants echoing like thunder. Inside, Jimin and Jungkook prepared, their hands brushing in a silent promise of solidarity. Yet in the shadows, someone watched, their eyes burning with envy, their heart poisoned by betrayal. The music began, the crowd erupted, and the harmony soared once more. But beneath the brilliance of the stage, the storm was ready to break. And when it did, it would not be the crowd who suffered. It would be Jimin and Jungkook, caught in the crossfire of love, loyalty, and silent hatred. The night of the concert unfolded like a fever dream. The stadium pulsed with light and sound, every heartbeat of the crowd syncing with the rhythm of the music. Jimin and Jungkook moved as if tethered by an invisible thread, their voices rising and falling in perfect harmony. Yet beneath the brilliance, a shadow lingered. Backstage, the tension was palpable. A figure stood in the corner, half hidden, watching with eyes that burned with envy. Every cheer for Jimin and Jungkook was a reminder of exclusion, every synchronized step a wound that deepened. The resentment had grown into something dangerous, something that no longer hid behind whispers. Jimin felt it in the way his chest tightened, as though the air itself had turned hostile. He remembered the strange malfunctions during rehearsals, the cables that snapped, the costumes that arrived late. He remembered the silence in the dressing room, the way conversations died when he entered. Jungkook, though composed, carried the same unease. He had seen the clenched fists, the narrowed eyes, the quiet rage that followed them like a shadow. As the performance reached its peak, the crowd erupted in hysteria. Fireworks exploded above, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Jimin's smile was radiant, Jungkook's voice unwavering. To the fans, it was perfection. To those backstage, it was unbearable. The moment of triumph was pierced by a sudden crackle of static. The microphones faltered, the lights flickered. For a heartbeat, the stage was plunged into chaos. Jimin's eyes widened, Jungkook's breath caught, and the crowd gasped in confusion. The sabotage was subtle but deliberate. Someone had struck. The show continued, but the harmony was no longer untouched. Jimin's voice trembled with fear, Jungkook's movements stiffened with suspicion. They knew now that the hatred was not just silent, it was active, alive, and waiting for the right moment to destroy them. When the curtain fell, the applause thundered, but behind it lay a silence heavy with threat. Jimin and Jungkook exchanged a glance, their bond stronger than ever, yet shadowed by the knowledge that someone close had turned against them. The storm was no longer distant. It was here, breathing down their necks, ready to unravel everything they had built. And as they stepped off the stage, the air carried not just the scent of sweat and smoke, but the unmistakable chill of betrayal. The harmony that had once been their greatest strength was now the spark of a war they could not escape. The storm finally broke. The concert had ended, but the chaos backstage was only beginning. Jimin pulled off his jacket, his chest still heaving from the performance, when a loud crash echoed through the corridor. Jungkook spun around, his eyes narrowing as he saw a piece of equipment toppled over, wires tangled like veins spilling across the floor. It wasn't an accident, someone had pushed it. The silence that followed was heavier than the roar of the crowd. Jimin's pulse raced, his mind replaying every suspicious glance, every whispered word. He felt the invisible line between admiration and hatred blur, and it terrified him. Jungkook stepped closer, his hand brushing Jimin's shoulder, grounding him. "We're being watched," he said, his voice low, steady, but edged with steel. The resentment had grown into something tangible. It was no longer just sabotage, it was intent. Someone wanted to break them, to fracture the bond that had become their strength. Jimin's thoughts spiraled. Was it jealousy, betrayal, fear? He remembered the clenched fists, the narrowed eyes, the silence that followed their laughter. The enemy wasn't outside, it was within. Days passed, and the tension seeped into every rehearsal. The group felt fractured, conversations clipped, laughter forced. Jimin noticed the way certain members avoided his gaze, the way Jungkook's presence drew quiet hostility. The harmony that had once united them now seemed to isolate them. Yet in the midst of the hostility, Jimin and Jungkook grew closer. They shared late-night talks, confessions whispered in the dark. Jimin admitted his fear of being despised for something he never asked for, while Jungkook confessed the guilt of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol others resented. Their bond was no longer just about music, it was survival. The next concert arrived like a looming trial. The crowd screamed, the lights blazed, and once again their voices soared in perfect unity. But beneath the brilliance, the sabotage struck again. A spotlight flickered, plunging Jimin into sudden darkness mid-performance. Panic surged through him, but Jungkook's hand found his, steadying him, pulling him back into rhythm. The crowd never noticed, but backstage the shadow smiled. When the curtain fell, the applause thundered, but Jimin and Jungkook felt only dread. The storm was no longer silent. It was alive, breathing down their necks, waiting for the moment to tear them apart. And as they walked off the stage, the air carried not just the scent of sweat and smoke, but the unmistakable chill of betrayal. The harmony that had once been their greatest strength was now the spark of a war they could not escape. Their unity had become both their shield and their curse, and the battle ahead would test not just their music, but their very souls.
The following days blurred into a haze of rehearsals, interviews, and sleepless nights, but the tension never left. Jimin felt it in the way his chest tightened whenever he entered a room, in the way silence followed him like a shadow. Jungkook, though outwardly calm, carried the same unease, his eyes scanning corners, his voice quieter when others were near. One evening, as they prepared for another performance, Jimin found a note slipped into his bag. The handwriting was jagged, hurried, but the words cut deep. "Your harmony will be your downfall." His breath caught, the paper trembling in his hands. He showed it to Jungkook, whose jaw clenched as he read. "This isn't just jealousy anymore," Jungkook murmured. "It's a warning." The realization struck them both. Someone close, someone within their circle had crossed a line. The sabotage was no longer subtle. It was deliberate, escalating, and dangerous. Jimin's mind raced with possibilities, faces flashing before him, each one carrying the potential for betrayal. During the next rehearsal, the tension reached a breaking point. The music faltered as equipment failed again, sparks flying from a faulty wire. Panic surged through the room, dancers scattering, staff shouting. Jimin froze, his heart pounding, while Jungkook grabbed his arm, pulling him back from the danger. Their eyes met, and in that moment they knew this was no accident. The group's unity fractured further. Accusations lingered unspoken, trust eroded with every passing day. Jimin felt the sting of betrayal in every glance, every silence. Jungkook carried the guilt of being the center of admiration, knowing it had become a weapon against them. Yet in the midst of the hostility, their bond grew unbreakable. Late at night, they sat together in the quiet, sharing fears and secrets. Jimin confessed his dread of being hated for something he never sought, while Jungkook admitted the burden of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol others resented. Their unity was no longer just about music, it was survival. The next concert loomed like a battlefield. The crowd would scream, the lights would blaze, but behind the curtain betrayal waited. Jimin felt it in his bones, Jungkook in his breath. The storm was no longer distant, it was here, alive, ready to strike. And as they stepped onto the stage, the harmony that had once been their greatest strength became both their shield and their curse. The music soared, the crowd erupted, but beneath the brilliance, the war had already begun. The storm that had been brewing finally began to show its teeth. Jimin sat alone in the dressing room, the note still folded in his pocket, its words echoing in his mind like a curse. "Your harmony will be your downfall." He could not shake the feeling that every step he took was being watched, every breath measured by someone who wanted him broken. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow that made the room feel more like a cage than a sanctuary. Jungkook entered quietly, his expression unreadable. He placed a bottle of water on the table and sat across from Jimin, his gaze steady. "We can't ignore this anymore," he said. "Whoever is behind it, they're getting bolder." His voice carried a calmness that masked the storm inside him, but Jimin could see the tension in his clenched jaw, the way his fingers tapped restlessly against his knee. The sabotage escalated during rehearsals. Speakers cut out mid-song, choreography cues were altered without warning, and once, a stage prop nearly collapsed where Jimin stood. Each incident was brushed off as coincidence, but both of them knew better. The resentment had evolved into a silent war, and they were its targets. Jimin's fear grew heavier with each passing day. He began to question every glance, every silence, every smile that seemed too forced. The group that had once been his family now felt fractured, each member retreating into their own shadows. Jungkook, though strong, carried the same burden. He felt the weight of admiration turn into a weapon, the spotlight becoming a curse. Yet in the midst of the hostility, their bond deepened. Late at night, they shared whispered confessions, their voices trembling with vulnerability. Jimin admitted his dread of being despised for something he never sought, while Jungkook confessed the guilt of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol others resented. Their unity was no longer just about music, it was survival. The next concert arrived like a trial by fire. The crowd screamed, the lights blazed, and once again their voices soared in perfect harmony, but beneath the brilliance, danger lurked. Mid-performance, a spotlight flickered violently, plunging Jimin into sudden darkness. Panic surged through him, but Jungkook's hand found his, steadying him, pulling him back into rhythm. The crowd never noticed, but backstage someone smiled in satisfaction. When the curtain fell, the applause thundered, but Jimin and Jungkook felt only dread. The storm was no longer silent, it was alive, breathing down their necks, waiting for the moment to tear them apart. Their harmony had become both their shield and their curse, and the war ahead would test not just their music, but their very souls. And as they walked off the stage, the air carried not just the scent of sweat and smoke, but the unmistakable chill of betrayal. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The days after the sabotage became a blur of suspicion and silence. Jimin could no longer walk into a room without feeling the weight of eyes on him, the sting of whispers that stopped the moment he appeared. Jungkook, though outwardly composed, carried the same burden, his gaze sharp, scanning every corner as though expecting betrayal to step out of the shadows. The note haunted Jimin. "Your harmony will be your downfall." He read it over and over, each time feeling the words sink deeper into his chest. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Someone close had decided that their unity was intolerable, and they would stop at nothing to break it. Rehearsals became battlegrounds. Speakers cut out mid-song, choreography cues shifted without warning, and once a stage prop nearly collapsed where Jimin stood. The staff brushed it off as coincidence, but Jimin and Jungkook knew better. The sabotage was deliberate, escalating, and dangerous. Late at night, they found solace only in each other. Jimin confessed his fear of being despised for something he never sought, while Jungkook admitted the guilt of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol others resented. Their bond was no longer just about music, it was survival. The next concert arrived like a looming trial. The crowd screamed, the lights blazed, and once again their voices soared in perfect harmony, but beneath the brilliance, danger struck. Mid-performance, the stage floor trembled as if something beneath had been tampered with. Jimin stumbled, panic flashing across his face, but Jungkook caught him, steadying him with a grip that spoke of trust and defiance. The crowd never noticed, but backstage, someone's smile widened. When the curtain fell, the applause thundered, but Jimin and Jungkook felt only dread. The storm was no longer silent, it was alive, breathing down their necks, waiting for the moment to tear them apart. Their harmony had become both their shield and their curse, and the war ahead would test not just their music, but their very souls. And as they walked off the stage, the air carried not just the scent of sweat and smoke, but the unmistakable chill of betrayal. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The storm that had been simmering finally began to consume the fragile balance of their world. Jimin woke in the middle of the night, his heart pounding, the echo of a nightmare still clinging to him. In the dream, the stage had collapsed beneath him, the crowd screaming and Jungkook's hand reaching out but never quite touching his. He sat up, drenched in sweat, staring at the shadows that stretched across the hotel room. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. The next morning, the tension was undeniable. The group gathered for rehearsal, but the air was thick with suspicion. Jimin noticed the way certain members avoided his gaze, the way conversations faltered when Jungkook entered. The unity that had once defined them was gone, replaced by a brittle silence that threatened to shatter at any moment. During soundcheck, the sabotage struck again. A microphone cut out mid-song, leaving Jimin exposed in silence while Jungkook's voice carried alone. Panic surged through him, but Jungkook stepped closer, his hand brushing Jimin's shoulder, grounding him. The crowd outside never knew, but backstage, the shadow of betrayal grew darker. Later, Jimin found another note tucked into his belongings. This one was colder, sharper. "The stage will not protect you." His breath caught, the paper trembling in his hands. He showed it to Jungkook, whose eyes hardened with resolve. "They want us afraid," Jungkook said, "but we can't let them win." their bond deepened in defiance of the hostility. Late at night, they whispered their fears, their voices trembling with vulnerability. Jimin admitted his dread of being despised for something he never sought, while Jungkook confessed the guilt of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol others resented. Their unity was no longer just about music, it was survival. The next concert loomed like a battlefield. The crowd screamed, the lights blazed, and once again their voices soared in perfect harmony, but beneath the brilliance, danger lurked. Mid-performance, the stage floor trembled as if something beneath had been tampered with. Jimin stumbled, panic flashing across his face, but Jungkook caught him, steadying him with a grip that spoke of trust and defiance. The crowd never noticed, but backstage someone's smile widened. When the curtain fell, the applause thundered, but Jimin and Jungkook felt only dread. The storm was no longer silent, it was alive, breathing down their necks, waiting for the moment to tear them apart. Their harmony had become both their shield and their curse, and the war ahead would test not just their music, but their very souls. And as they walked off the stage, the air carried not just the scent of sweat and smoke, but the unmistakable chill of betrayal. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The storm pressed closer, its presence now undeniable. Jimin sat in the rehearsal room, his reflection fractured in the mirror. His eyes were tired, his smile forced, and behind him the room seemed to shrink with every passing second. Jungkook entered quietly, his footsteps heavy, his expression unreadable. He placed a hand on Jimin's shoulder, grounding him, but the silence between them spoke louder than words. The group's unity had splintered. Conversations were clipped, laughter hollow, and trust eroded with every glance. Jimin felt the sting of betrayal in the way certain members avoided his gaze, the way whispers died when he entered. Jungkook carried the same burden, his calm exterior hiding the storm within. The sabotage grew bolder. During a rehearsal, the stage lights suddenly blazed too bright, blinding Jimin until he stumbled. Jungkook rushed to steady him, his grip firm, his eyes burning with defiance. The staff dismissed it as a technical error, but Jimin knew better. The shadow was no longer hiding, it was striking. Late at night, Jimin found another note slipped beneath his door. "The harmony you cherish will destroy you." His breath caught, the paper trembling in his hands. He showed it to Jungkook, whose jaw tightened with resolve. "They want us broken," Jungkook said, "but we won't give them that." Their bond deepened in defiance of the hostility. They shared whispered confessions, their voices trembling with vulnerability. Jimin admitted his dread of being despised for something he never sought, while Jungkook confessed the guilt of being admired too much, of becoming a symbol others resented. Their unity was no longer just about music, it was survival. The next concert arrived like a trial by fire. The crowd screamed, the lights blazed, and once again their voices soared in perfect harmony, but beneath the brilliance, danger struck. Mid-performance, a section of the stage floor gave way, sending Jimin stumbling toward the edge. Panic surged through him, but Jungkook caught him, pulling him back with a grip that spoke of trust and defiance. The crowd never noticed, but backstage someone's smile widened. When the curtain fell, the applause thundered, but Jimin and Jungkook felt only dread. The storm was no longer silent, it was alive, breathing down their necks, waiting for the moment to tear them apart. Their harmony had become both their shield and their curse, and the war ahead would test not just their music, but their very souls. And as they walked off the stage, the air carried not just the scent of sweat and smoke, but the unmistakable chill of betrayal. The battle had begun, and there was no turning back. The storm had finally reached its breaking point. Jimin and Jungkook stood side by side in the dim corridor after the final encore, their bodies trembling not from exhaustion but from the weight of everything that had led them here. The crowd outside was still screaming their names, but inside, silence pressed down like a heavy curtain. The betrayal was no longer hidden. The notes, the sabotage, the shadows, they had all been pieces of a puzzle that now revealed its cruel truth. Someone close, someone they had once trusted, had decided their unity was unforgivable. Jimin's voice broke the silence. "We can't keep living like this." His eyes glistened, not with tears but with a fierce resolve. Jungkook turned to him, his jaw tight, his gaze steady. "Then we fight not with anger but with what we have, our music, our bond." The next performance became more than a concert. It was defiance, a declaration that no amount of envy or betrayal could sever what they had built. Their voices rose together, stronger than ever, weaving through the stadium like fire and steel. The crowd erupted, unaware of the war being fought behind the curtain, but feeling the raw power of two souls refusing to break. Backstage, the shadow watched, realizing that hatred could not extinguish harmony. The sabotage had failed, the threats had lost their power. Jimin and Jungkook had turned fear into strength, betrayal into resilience. When the final note faded and the lights dimmed, they bowed together, hands brushing in silent solidarity. The storm had not destroyed them, it had forged them. Their harmony, once seen as a curse, had become their greatest weapon. And as they walked off the stage for the last time, the air carried not the chill of betrayal, but the warmth of victory. The battle was over. The scars would remain, but so would their bond, unbreakable, eternal, and stronger than any storm.